What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another episode of At Home with Mark. Today is season 7, episode 6, and this is a pretty special episode for me. I've been trying to get Roger on for a while. I'm a huge Jellyfish fan. Everybody knows that. I talk about Jellyfish a lot on this channel, Roger, especially in these shows. But dude, thank you so much for making some time. I know you got a lot going on, so I really appreciate it.
You're most welcome. Thanks for the opportunity to discuss things that make me happy.
Yeah, man, me too. So Roger, I have to ask you this because I ask everybody this question, and I'm so curious about your answer to this. But what is your earliest musical memory?
I have a couple, and mostly it's the song "The Age of Aquarius" by the Fifth Dimension.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, just being in the back of my parents' '66 Mustang, which a lot of people were driving at the time.
Nice.
And that song would come on, especially the intro, which is very moving and very orchestral. And I was just hypnotized. It just captured me, stopped me dead in my tracks. And I just wanted to listen and let these sounds like wash over me. And then, as you know, that song goes through several movements, wrapping up in this big, almost classic gospel rejoicing section. Super, super groovy, super like pop culture hippie at the time. And I was just hooked. And then another song was Spinning Wheel by Blood, Sweat, and Tears.
Yeah, man.
And, you know, that was a huge hit in the day. But whenever we were at a restaurant and that song came on, my mom said I would just get out of my chair and start dancing on the floor uncontrollably. Like I still had food in my mouth and the fork in my mouth. It didn't matter. And then in addition to that, the Glenn Campbell variety show was a big hit in the late 60s when I was 3 years old or so. And I can just remember him always singing a song, and just like it was a whole kind of vibe and attitude of pop music of that era. And so all that was super. What all that had in common was it just was a super visceral, deep impact on me. I kind of lost. You know, you forget that you're in a body and you're just transported with these soundscapes, and those were the songs that did it. And of course, there were many more to come as I grew up. But those are my earliest memories.
Okay.
Yeah.
How early did you start playing keys?
I started banging on things and told my parents I wanted to play drums when I was like 3 or 4. But by the time I was 5, they started me on piano lessons because we had moved, and there was a young girl who was teaching kids in the neighborhood piano. And my parents were kind of wise enough to go, well, if we're going to pay for music lessons, he should learn harmony and chords in addition to the rhythm, which is all I was going to learn from drums, obviously.
Right.
So thank God they did that. And I not that I hated piano, I just was disinterested. I couldn't care less. And I just kind of kept doing it and practiced once a week because it came relatively easy to me. And I had a crush on my piano teacher. This really cute high school girl, and I would just like stare at her while she told me, "Put your fingers here, and then that's a C, and that's an F sharp." And I'm just like, "You're pretty," you know.
She's getting all Lydian on you there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that sharp.
Exactly.
I told you guys we were gonna get nerdy.
Maybe that was part of it. I was hypnotized. But yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, you know what I'm curious about? So, like, guitar is my principal instrument, but I play keys too, and I love, like, when you talk about like the gospel influences of you know that tune. Did you get deep into that stuff in terms of voice leading, and like chord substitutions and things like that with gospel piano? Yeah.
No, because it was never in my environment.
Okay.
I would obviously hear gospel influence on all kinds of music, but I didn't understand that's where its roots were. I mean, Carole King and Jerry Goffin writing, "You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman," that's a gospel song, period. And that's why Aretha, destroyed it. She just it was like such an incredible vehicle for her. But I didn't know that's all rooted in Gospel 101, or Simon and Garfunkel, Bridge Over Troubled Water, any of that.
Oh, yeah.
So I learned, and then of course, as I got older, I really didn't discover like gospel roots until I was in my 20s and 30s. And then we actually started going to various churches down in South Central Los Angeles, where they would have concerts on Sunday nights, and like 4 or 5 artists would come and perform. And we had a friend who was really, really into that, and he suggested we come with him, and that was eye-opening. But you have to understand, I was never. Whenever I heard blues piano, I was pretty disinterested.
Yeah.
It had to be like the 1-4-5 chord changes are so boring to me that I literally mix them up. Like if I'm going to jam on the blues, do I go to the 4 now or the 5? I can never hear the difference.
Yeah.
So what ended up happening was the jazz bug bit me in high school. And of course, all jazz in one way or another is rooted in blues at its core. So when I started studying Charlie Parker and bebop, 40s, 50s, and that whole trajectory, you started learning. Yeah, they were bored with the blues too.
Right.
That's what everybody did. So they came up with all these 101,000 endless ways to keep the blues interesting and keep breaking the mold over and over again. So that became really fascinating to me, because what really hooked me in was interesting harmony.
Yeah.
On a Steely Dan song, or a Chicago song, or a Zeppelin song. I mean, it didn't matter what it was. And then when I started studying jazz showed me like where it all came from, and then like where Gershwin got involved. And what I've always really enjoyed, it seems the music I'm most drawn to, and this is no big surprise, but it's when roots music, say folk or blues, gospel stuff, merges with super Anglo, like British world.
Yeah.
And then all the combinations that you get from that. Like, I enjoy listening to Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf, but I prefer when people like the Stones get their fingers in there and totally mess with it. That's what I enjoy the most, and spoke to me and speaks to me the most. So you can pretty much always look at that. All the music that has turned me on over the years, from punk to disco to synth pop to what have you, it's always got at least one component of some kind of underlying soul. There's some kind of passionate thing. Like if it gets too intellectual, it usually bores me. If it gets too just wailing vocals, and it's too it's just like, just sing the melody. I don't want to hear the 2,800 embellishments of the national anthem. I want to hear the lyricism of the national anthem melody. Just the first example that comes to my mind, and the simplicity of that. So I really like that fusion of the super urban roots, street history, and then what happens when just the Anglo world gets a hold of that.
Yeah.
And pop culture, and these different culture fuse. That's what's always kept things interesting for me.
It's interesting too, isn't it, about like just like the domino effect of how music here influenced there, and then that music came back here and influenced here, and it's just like a big, like messy mix of stuff. I love that. It's just become like its own thing now. I mean, I'll never forget the first time I heard that quarter note stab on a piano. Like first time I heard like Paul McCartney do that or something, I was like, what is this? This is like so lively. And then like the harmonies moving in all these really cool directions, and there's surprise chords that are popping out of nowhere. And like that stuff is just, I think that's the thing. When I heard the first time I heard, I'm going to give a shout out to my friend Jamie for exposing me to Jellyfish and Owsley and all these great power pop bands. I did not understand, especially at that time. That had to be weird. This is the only question I'll ask you about Jellyfish. It had to be weird at that time to be the outside kids in the middle of the grunge era too, because what you guys were doing was so far ahead harmonically of what was going on that it was like, but we're over here doing this super cool thing, man. Like, was that weird? Like that
Yeah,
time?
yes, but we were very aware of that, and
Mm-hmm.
it was very natural for us because, speaking for myself, I never fit in anywhere with what was going on musically, film
Right.
wise. I mean, there was certainly popular music that I liked and I was inspired by, but the stuff that I was drawn to, I mean, you can just start with, you know, I told someone this the other day. If I'm on a desert island and they're like, you've got your turntable, you get one catalog only to listen to the rest of your life. What's it going to be? Now, of course, that's going to be a challenging answer, but I can pretty much get it down to the band XTC. I pretty
Ah,
much like their entire catalog. Obviously, I have my favorite eras, and their catalog is, I don't know, what, 15 to 20 albums, but they have modeled all the best of all the things that inspired me about the rock pop world, I should say, and why I kind of chose to jump into that and contribute to that lexicon of literature.
mm-hmm.
Um, the time that my partners and I started doing that in the late 80s, early 90s, I mean, XTC was never fashionable.
Mm-hmm.
And not that that's the only thing we did. Obviously, there were lots of things that inspired us. I could talk your ear off about that. But my point is that type of sing-along pop, which is by its very nature very Beatley, was now almost 30 years irrelevant, or,
Right.
or not irrelevant, but out of the top 10. Okay, so our first album comes out at the height of MTV hair metal and Guns N' Roses and all that, some of which we like them, not really much, but when grunge hit, that's our age group. That's Gen X making their musical statement. I loved a ton of that stuff. I was a huge Soundgarden fan, Nirvana, of course, uh, parts of Alice in Chains. That was such an energy, and of course there were British bands like Swerve Driver, My Bloody Valentine, Cocteau Twins. Well, that's earlier, but there that kind of heavy, pretty
Mm.
music. In the case of Soundgarden and other bands, there were like odd time things happening, so it was almost like it was Sabbath. It was Sabbath Phase 2 with
Yeah.
a big twist. Now, man, what's not to like? I loved a lot of that music first run in the early 70s when I was a little kid, and now it was coming through a different funnel with my generation. So that stuff was inspiring to us. In fact, the song All Is Forgiven on Spilt Milk, that was us wanting to do a high energy rock song that was interesting to us that way. That I wouldn't necessarily say was grunge, but it was inspired by all that stuff that was happening around us.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yet, like you said, our second album comes out at the height of that. So we didn't fit in ever.
Right.
Uh, to me, to this day, it's an incredible miracle that folks at the record company are willing to take a chance on us because they believed in the compositional strengths of a lot of our melodies and lyrics and that stuff, that we were even given a chance because we weren't part of some signing trend, right?
Yeah.
We weren't grunge band number 9 and 10 and 11 to get signed out of Seattle like so many were. So I took great pride in being our own thing and standing out. But it was a double-edged sword because a lot of radio communities didn't know what the hell to make of us. Well, what do I do with this? It doesn't fit.
Yeah.
Even though it's like, yeah, but it's classic sing-along pop like we all grew up with. Just maybe not like Madonna. It had more to do with Wings or Cheap Trick than Paula Abdul.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I can only imagine. I mean, I was in middle school in '91 when all those records came out, and You know, like I didn't have, obviously we didn't have the internet, so I didn't have a way to find out what are the other bands that are doing stuff right now. And like I
Right.
was on, you know, on the East Coast and you guys are out there. And so it didn't like word didn't travel as fast. Now it can travel like wildfire. But yeah, it's just anytime I look back and anytime I listen to that record, because now I'm exposing my daughter to your music too. And
Right.
she's a singer and she's like, oh, and like my wife is not into like heavier music. She's kind of like would rather hear bluegrass all day or some folky music. So anytime I spin like spilt milk and vinyl in the family room, it's me and my daughter chilling and listening to it. But she is like, wow, like this is so different because I'm a huge Pearl Jam fan too. Like that's why I started playing guitar. So she's like, this is like the same but different. Like there's more going on in this than there is here. Like I feel more from like the Jellyfish stuff with like all the harmonies and beautiful like melodies and stuff compared to like listening to something off of Vitology, for instance, or 10. And it's just anytime I think about that stuff, I'm like, that's what's so cool about music too. Like the fact that those two things can exist at the same time and have crossover too. You know, like Kurt Cobain talked about that all the time about like, I guess later after the feuds between Pearl Jam and whoever in Nirvana, like we're done. He was like, man, a lot of the people that like their band like our band, like, you know, kind of the more for everybody. But I think it's so cool how that stuff could coexist at that same exact time in history, in music history.
Sure.
It's pretty rad. Well, let's talk about Radio Daze because, man, this feels like such a cool progression in terms of music that you're releasing. And I know some of this stuff is older music that you kind of brought back to life, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I want to talk a little bit about the process of this. And the things that I am so curious about, Roger, is, you know, being a musician myself and having been and worked in studios and like hearing how you sonically capture music for the music that you release. And Blue too, like how you guys produce music and arrange music is so fascinating to me. Because there's so many songs on this record. I mean, we can go through and talk briefly about each track if you want.
Oh, yeah, sure.
But
Whatever it was, absolutely.
okay, cool. But what I feel like from this record is there's so many great like up high energy tunes that are just feel great tunes that feel like they could have been on a record right after Spilt Milk, in my opinion. Or when I listen to I Feel Good, Bad, Fine, I feel like Wings. I felt like a Wings presence in that song. So talk to me about like, I mean, what was the first song you tracked for this record?
I don't remember that. I do them all piecemeal.
Okay.
I just kind of jump in and get started because I can be as lazy and procrastinate as much as the next guy. And so it's like, well, got to start somewhere. And all these songs are bits and pieces that I've just solidified over the years in between all my other projects. You know, I Feel Good, Bad, Fine. That was written after Spilt Milk, right afterwards,
Okay.
prepping ideas for another Jellyfish record, not knowing we were going to split up. But the core of that's how old the core of that idea is. And then Rockin' It Our Way, that was written during the Imperial Drag stuff in 95,
right.
96. Again, when I say written, that means I had a verse and a chorus that I thought was solid.
Yeah.
And I was mumbling some incoherent lyric. So lyrics typically don't get finished till the end, and then like the bridge intro flush out the whole architecture of the song. Like Rockin' It Our Way, I remember being in my my fiance's living room at the time, and she was away at work, and I just got this bug in my head. I've got to finish that song. If I'm going to record it, I've got to finish it. And I don't have a bridge. I don't have an intro. I don't have an arrangement. And I like writing on an electric guitar because it's easy to play without an amp. You can hear it enough that it's vibrating, but you can softly sing melody shapes over your head, in your head over the vibration of the guitar. And that was in 2015, I want to say.
Man.
And then I started tracking it in 2016, but then, yeah, I mean, it's just crazy because it's not, I wish it was the only thing I did for a living, like back in the Jellyfish days, but got to pay the bills. So these songs all get piecemealed. And I'm starting a band. That was another Jellyfish idea, like right after Spilt Milk. And then I wrote the lyrics and the arrangement for that song in like 2016, 2017. And I didn't even start recording it probably till during COVID.
Okay.
And it's not because I want to take that long. It's just how the life trajectory unfolds. I'm like, because we did the Licorice Quartet stuff with Eric and Tim from Jellyfish. And as that project was coming to an end, I started completing this EP.
Okay. Man, yeah. I mean, I feel like I definitely felt the Rockin' It Our Way. Definitely, I also had that Jellyfish thing. But there's tunes on here too, man, where I'm like, oh, okay, this is a cool direction too. You know, like, and your voice sounds so great on this record.
Thank you very much.
It's just really great, and like all the background vocals and stuff that Blue did with you too. Here, let me ask you this question. So let's get nerdy about production.
Of course.
I understand kind of how that whole big Queen harmony like vocal thing works in terms of tracking over top of other vocals and doubling stuff and things like that. But like, what do you normally do to have the clarity of that cut through the mix? Because I feel like sometimes that could get muddy if you're not doing it right EQ wise. So how do you manage to do that stuff? So every time I hear vocals on anything that you touch, things cut so well and are so clean. How does that happen with those big tracked vocals?
Well, first of all, it's always a jigsaw puzzle, and it's never gotten necessarily any easier since I started enjoying arranging backgrounds like this way back in Jellyfish days. What I've come to discover, which I'm not necessarily happy about, is that obviously each singer has their own timbre. And just like, I'm sure you've worked with other singers, including yourself maybe, where you'll hear yourself on a recording, your friend, if you hear him on a recording, or another person on a recording, or a woman singing. And the assumption is first of all, they're an okay singer, but you can tell right away how the tone of their voice, just like a trumpet or a saxophone or a violin or a fuzzy guitar sound, how it sits in a mix, and how a microphone responds to it, and all those unique overtones that make my voice sound different than your voice sound, right? It's super individual, super unique. Not to mention when you then multi-track yourself, right? So if I double track myself, I now get another tonality. If I triple track, I now get yet another tonality, even though it's mostly that one sound. But some people's voices resonate and have a timbre that it just works better. It resonates better. It jumps out of the speakers better. It sits with guitars and bass better. And those are all accidental. I use a band like Crosby, Stills, and Nash. All those guys harmonized in previous bands before they came together. But I think even they would agree that the combination of their particular timbres added up in a way that was just so unique, so memorable, so definitive, and frankly stood out from the combinations they had in the other bands. Same with the singers in Queen, which was just Freddie, Roger, and Brian. And the combination of Fleetwood Mac, right? So you get Stevie, Lindsay, and Christine. So these are harmony combinations, or the Carpenters, Karen and her brother Richard. These have results, and you can't just take, or the Wilson brothers, of course, and their cousin and friend. I mean,
right.
You can't just. That's why you can't just take a Queen harmony and have three really great singers sing it. And it's like, there it is. Kind of. Same with the Beach Boys. Oh, let's get a bunch of great singers cover a Beach Boys song. Well, they're nailing all the parts. In fact, they're singing them exquisitely. There's so much nuance, and then it really has to do with the timbres of those people's voices. They add up in a certain way. And then you start getting into all the nuance of Brian always scooping into the first note. I mean, the Hollies always scooped into the first note as if it was instinctual. So I grew up scooping into my first note, not knowing that I was even doing it. And somebody pointed out to me, "Why do you always scoop? Just hit the note." I'm like, I didn't even know I was scooping. And it had to do with singers that I was inspired by, that I was trying to imitate as a young man.
Mm-hmm.
So things come into play. So you can go, why does Def Leppard vocal stack sound different than Queen's vocal stack? Sounds different than the Cars vocal stack? Sounds different than the Bee Gees vocal stack? Because at the end of the day, they're doing triads, and then if they're getting fancy, they're adding sevenths and extensions, right? Mm-hmm. So Queen adds a lot of extension. Their stuff often is, same with the Beach Boys, is often very jazzy, but the Beach Boys can sound jazzier. Queen never sounds jazzy, and it has more to do with their songs. But you and I understand the mechanics, and so I can, we can look at the mechanics all day long. And so as a keyboardist, I enjoyed discovering arranging strategies, and that just means like becoming a good musician, just copying your heroes.
Yeah.
I sit there and transcribe and go, oh, this chord is sounding nice and juicy because they have somebody leaning on the seventh. It's not just a minor triad. We're getting the whole step rub of the seven against the root. I could also take that seven, as you know, and move it up almost an octave. That's going to have a different tension than if I have the root and the seventh next to each other. So you're always looking at half steps and things that create these clusters and richness. And it's no different than arranging for brass ensembles, the saxophone ensemble, the trombones in a jazz big band. So when I grew up playing a lot of jazz, I would be the pianist for a lot of big bands. And I would just see, often like a Duke Ellington song, when he would write the song and arrange it. And he's a pianist. And he would just do a cluster voicing for the trumpet. So one guy would have the melody, and then he would harmonize, right? And there's different strategies for harmonizing that melody. And that's why I started noticing whether Brian May and Freddie Mercury understood that's what they were doing in a lot of their vocals, or Brian, that's what they were doing. Especially the Beach Boys, because the Beach Boys come right out of the jazz tradition. Yeah. If you've ever listened to any of the Four Freshmen records that Brian grew up listening to, you're like, hey, they're ripping off the Beach Boys. No, they came 10 years before the Beach Boys. It's that you can. It's a direct. He basically upped it. He put a little more teenage spirit in it because they were listening to Chuck Berry and the British Invasion, but they still kept that beauty and sentimentality and jazz tradition of what the Four Freshmen were doing as a jazz vocal group. Mm. So I would just use these tools as needed for our music. And Andy and I worshipped everybody from Simon and Garfunkel and the Byrds, all the way through. I mean, there weren't, harmony started becoming much less fashionable. So by the time you get to the 80s, there's not really many vocal groups. Yeah. Whereas in the 60s and 70s, everybody was harmonizing. Whether you were the Doobie Brothers, or, I mean, even a band like Cheap Trick, which inspired us to no end, there's 2 and 3 part stuff happening all the time. Not in a Beach Boys way, but still, it's still a richness. By the time you get to grunge, nobody's harmonizing because keyboards and synthesizers and harmonies were indications of sophisticated production. And the punk rock era said, we're not interested in sophisticated production. We want to get back to the garage. Mm-hmm. Well, awesome. That spoke to me too. There's just not a lot of harmonies in it. Yeah. So when Andy and I were launching the foundation for Jellyfish, we were so inspired by so many vocal groups. We said, well, what role can harmonies play in our music? And then we set out to discover what that would look like.
Man, wow. Okay. Did you spend a lot of time, like, and especially like on this record on Radio Daze, or maybe you already had this, but do you have a specific microphone works for the timbre of your voice?
Well, I finally found one, but I still have my timbre voice to contend. I use a Peluso 67, and I don't mind giving them a shout out because it's a very affordable way to get a U67, U67 that none of us can afford anymore. I kind of missed that window where I should have been buying microphones that were, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, but now they're $15,000 and $20,000. So I missed that window. I was busy buying keyboards, as you can see.
Right. We can talk about the pleasure room too in a little bit. I'm
Yeah.
so curious about all that stuff.
But as far as vocal timbre, I want to point out. So on the album you've got, Blue does a lot of harmony singing with me. Now, I'm a fan of his and got to know his work by working with him here in LA. He invited me to join him on some projects. But I got to know his voice really well. And he's a classic strong male tenor. He almost sounds like a horn.
Yeah.
It's a very, very, very brassy, saxophony tone. That's not what my voice does at all. And we also worked with a woman named Cecilia Peruti, who was a backup singer in Beck's band for a while. And when we did stuff from the Glamping EP, I thought her voice and my voice and Blue's voice would all blend well. I was very suspicious that it would work, not having worked with them that way before. And what I discovered was that her voice and his voice added up magnificently. Obviously, we gave her the top pitch. And my voice was kind of the weak link. But I know how to compensate. I was trying to be the warm, woolly, kind of fuzzy warmth guy on the bottom. But my voice is so reedy that it doesn't have a lot of bottom warmth. So I just kind of dealt with it because I knew if I just EQ'd and stuff, I could make it work. But, you know, I mean, you always know in your head, well, this is what it should be. This is what the ideal should be. But you can only work with what you have to work with.
Right. Yeah, man.
We all can't have McCartney's voice and Freddie Mercury's voice and Robin Zander's voice and Lindsey Buckingham's voice. Those are, you know, we can all sit down and practice our instruments for 30 years and get highly competent and uniquely expressive on our instrument and then sculpt our sound with all of our pedals and our unique amp collection and vintage guitars. But you're either born with a set of pipes that has character to it or you're not.
Yeah.
You know, Elvis Costello was born with his voice. It's not for everybody, but he sure as hell has made it work. You know?
Tom Waits. Tom Waits has made that. Yeah. I mean, yeah. It's like playing into your strengths.
Burt Bacharach's the first to admit he never considered himself a lead vocalist. So he had to find his Dionne Warwicks and all these people that ended up singing his song. Because I'm sorry, if Burt Bacharach, we've heard him sing, when he sings his lyrical melodies, it's not the same. Yeah. You need a classic, often female, highly lyrical, soaring. She has to be a violin. It has to be a violin that's singing his lyrical melodies. I don't want a bass clarinet honking through his melody. Right? It's not going to work. Yeah. And this is why I don't want to. It's not just a matter of can people harmonize like groups could in the 60s or not. There's all these other factors that come into it and really dictate the success. You know, you had Roy Thomas Baker, who in his heyday worked obviously with Queen, the band, and the Cars, Nick Gilder, and some others. We had Foreigner, you know, that we know him for. If you go to all those groups, the records that he did, especially when he did the Cars records, and the Journey records, you hear that vocal stack sound. Now, part of that is the way he recorded their voices and the amount of multi-tracks and how many guys he had on the vocal and what position the mic in Omni or cardioid or whatever, and how hard he's hitting tape. All those things are factors. The fact of the matter is, in the band Queen, Journey, and the Cars, you had not one lead singer, you had several lead singers. You had very talented singers who could absolutely carry a tune by themselves. So you get three of those guys around a mic, you've already got the raw material for very strong vocal stacks. How you capture them, that's going to help. It's not going to really make or break it. Yeah. If somebody knows how to write strong triads or four-part or five-part chordscapes throughout, you're going to get that impact. You know, so, or you could do it like Jeff Lynne and Todd Rundgren and do it all yourself.
Yeah, man.
Which is going to create another effect.
Yeah. I mean, I'm always so just fascinated by great singers too. Like I wish, you know, if only Jeff Buckley was still around, I would love to hear what he would be doing right now. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, there's stuff like that that just breaks my brain to think about. I can't even imagine him, you know, what he would be doing. But do you feel happy with how your voice has progressed over the years? Like, because I feel like on this record in particular, man, it's so strong and it feels so warm in the mix, and it's
Well, nothing makes me happier than to hear you say that.
woo.
I'm very aware of what I feel my voice's strengths and weaknesses are, and then of course where I feel there's weaknesses, I try to overcompensate in another area to make up for it, and blah blah blah. But you know, it's been mostly a blessing, but I don't want to say a curse, but a reality check. You know, when you because I met Andy Sturmer very early on in my musical life, and to this day, he has one of my favorite male tenor voices I've ever heard.
Mm-hmm.
Same with Eric Dover. Eric Dover is a completely different singer, but also a strong tenor, approaches singing very differently from Andy, has his own unique character and approach. And he's another guy that just like can sing into a shitty ass mic, into a 4-track demo tape, and it's ripping your head off. And it's because of his raw tone. Now, obviously, he has to be in charge of how he's going to use it, but it's, you know, you either have a 59 Les Paul, or you've got some Squire guitar from the mid 80s made in Mexico or something. I mean, it's like,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
the mercy of those instruments.
Yeah, it's interesting how like much physicality plays a part in like the richness or the timbre of your voice and all that stuff. It's like you got, like what you said, it's like you're born with it. It's part of your body. Your instrument is part of your body in that sense. So it's, you got to
Well,
deal
I
with
mean,
the cards you're
look,
dealt.
we've all watched the Beatles 3-part documentary thing now.
Mm-hmm.
Probably some of us probably multiple times,
Yep.
and it just reaffirms. You can just start with Paul's voice. Paul's voice allowed him to explore so much territory because it was such a huge range. It wasn't like he was just a strong baritone or he was a strong tenor. He has a whole scope of what he can do with his voice. And obviously, he trained it. He had lots of practice. But he has a set of pipes that Lennon doesn't have, that George doesn't have. All of whom are fantastic singers, of course, as well. But you see, when you watch Paul, I was reminded, I'm watching it with it was hard sometimes to watch it with Let Go of Envy, because it's so effortless.
Mm-hmm.
Just not only sailing up to a high A, a high B in a melody, but then if he wants to overdrive it, he can lean into it and start breaking up.
Yeah.
I don't have to tell you, 90% of fantastically talented musicians, including singers, they can't do that. It's simply not an option with their vocal. Same with Freddie and all the things that he can do with his voice. It's simply not an option for other really good singers. So you run with what you can and roll with how things are. You know, that's why bands like 10cc, which were endlessly inspiring to me, and Jellyfish, and to this day, they're one of my. They continue to blow my mind. They continue to teach me things after all this time, and every single guy in the band could sing their ass off.
Man, yeah.
Like super unique. It's almost like too much power. Like,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure that's got to be tough in a band too. I bet you there's some ego stuff once things start to do well for bands and you're like, oh, I could go do this on my own and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, you're so good together. Stay there.
Yeah.
Are you a fan of another LA band, Daze?
Oh, I'm aware of them. I haven't spent too much time with their music.
Oh,
there's
Roger.
an album that our friend Jonathan Wilson did from about 2 or 3 years ago. It was before COVID that I really enjoyed.
Passwords?
Yeah, that sounds. I think so.
Might have been Passwords. Doom Scroller is their newest one. But Taylor Goldsmith, the singer in that band, his dad's Lenny Goldsmith, who played with Tower of Power, which I didn't realize until about a year or two ago. I'm like,
I didn't know that either.
There you go. That's where you got them
Wow.
pipes. But that dude, you know, same thing, effortlessly singing an A over middle C. And I'm just like,
Yeah,
damn it. Like, I wish I could do
yeah,
that, but I can't. You know what I mean? It's so hard to kind of wrap your head around. And like people say, oh, it's like lifting weights, you know, you can kind of get there. I'm like, can you? Like, yeah, I don't know, man. Like, it's tough.
Can you expand your range? Absolutely. But there's a point where, sorry, it's just going to sound pinched.
Yeah.
And sorry, it's not going to sound as juicy and as rewarding as some of the notes lower in your particular singer's meaty range.
Yeah.
Now, very early on, I learned to compensate by copying Brian and Todd Rundgren and kicking up the falsetto. It's like, oh, that's too hard. Whoop! I would just throw it up the falsetto. And what I didn't understand is that not everybody could do that as smoothly and easily. I just did it because nobody told me I couldn't, or nobody told me that's hard. It's just like growing up and playing sports. I was used to being shorter than everybody else. Well, it wasn't until later that people told me that, you know, being short when you play sports is not necessarily optimal. And so before everybody hit puberty, I just learned to run faster than everybody. It's like, well, okay, if the ball has to be down there, I'll figure out how to get there faster than this guy, who in terms of like muscle mass and height and stuff, you know, and certainly in sports like basketball, and then everybody's hitting puberty, it was like, okay, this is all changing now because I can't outrun anybody. They're just going to put their hand out and stop me, and I'm going to fall over. You know?
Right.
But
I mean, you found your thing. You found your thing. Who cares?
Yeah, exactly. And I got really into skating, which is a one-man. It's one-on-one. It's you're always your personal best.
Right. Man. Well, oh man, I got distracted. I'm sorry I took us off on a tangent there with voice, but
I will do that.
Oh, you know what, man? It's fun to talk about this stuff too with you because like since I was 36, I'm 44 now. When I hit 36, I was doing a gig and I blew my voice out, which didn't happen at that time. And I completely lost my falsetto since then. I don't have it anymore. And there's certain notes I can't, and I'm, you know, like it's in your head psychologically, like, oh my God, this is like an E above middle C, or this is an F. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that tonight, and it's so I'm trying to figure out how to like, okay, now I have to figure out how to compensate, like you're saying, and move to fit myself, you know, which is hard because, you know, when you're young and you're growing up, like I used to be able to sing this just fine, and now I can't. Yeah. So this stuff is interesting to me. But anyway, so I want to talk to you about, so On Our Way to the Moon is my favorite song on the record. Oh, cool. And I think I just like the mood mostly of that whole track. Can you talk to me a little bit? First of all, who played drums on this record? And how many?
On that song, Victor and Drizzo played drums.
Okay. Drum sounds are awesome on this record too. Like it's just like, I'm a huge rhythm guy. I'm a big, when I was at Berkeley, I was like huge into like fusion, and Wayne Krantz is like one of my favorite guitar players of all time. And he's big on rhythm. And so like drums always hit me first on a record, surprisingly. But this record is no exception in terms of sonically how buttery that snare drum is from track to track. It just, everything just, it just, I got to play it through. I've only listened through my earpods and through my car stereo, and I'm like, I want to put it through my stereo upstairs so I can really hear everything separated. But the mood on that song, the vibe of the track in general, it just feels so good. And I feel like the guitars, the way that you capture the guitars, can you talk about that, since I'm a guitarist, a little bit?
Sure. Well, On the Way to the Moon is it's three different people at three different times. Jim Wilson played the majority of the main rhythm guitar, kind of the classic rock rhythm Les Paul stuff. And Jason Faulkner came in and overdubbed additional electrics. Like when you hear there's like a lead line that's kind of noodling throughout the chorus and the second verse and stuff. Very McCartney, in fact. That's all Jason playing that. And Taylor, he plays a lot of leads.
From Rooney, right? Taylor, yeah. Gotcha. I'm blanking on his last name.
I'm spacing too, which is absurd.
But
Taylor Lott.
he's awesome.
Yeah,
I
Taylor
love him.
Lott. And he's friends with Blue also.
Yeah.
He's playing a lot of the leads on the outro. He's playing acoustic with Jason in the verses to thicken it up. And even some of the electric rhythm stuff. So, because it's always sculpting. I don't have a band that I've worked with that I trust, and I'm not one of these I can play every instrument equally well guys. I kind of hyper focused keys when I would have served me better to keep practicing drums, which I grew up playing. I can still sit behind it. I mean, that's me playing on Good, Bad, Fine. I'm playing drums on that.
Oh, okay. Awesome.
But I love the bass, but I never bothered to like master it. It was always like too big for my little hands. I was like, "Fuck this! This is too hard." I can play I can play bass synth. I can shred bass synth lines. All right.
Yeah.
But and same with guitar. I know my bar chords, and I've played guitar on all my solo records up until recently. But it just takes forever, and I'll record 20 passes and then grab my favorite bits from all the I'll comp guitar parts. That just takes days. I'm like, hey, Jason, can I just pay you to play rhythm guitar on this song? It'll take you like 30 minutes.
He's a good call. He's a good call to call in.
Yeah, I have some very incredible, talented friends who've come in my assistance, and but so Jason had his way of recording his own amps, as did Taylor, and it's nothing that would boggle your mind or anything. It really, these last two EPs, I worked with an engineer that we got to know for the Licorice Quartet stuff, named Ken Sluter. So on this most recent EP, so the first EP that you get on side 2 of the vinyl, it's the one with Operator, Funhouse, Is It All a Dream? Those were all mixed by John Paterno. Okay. And then the newest songs were mixed by Ken Sluter. And both guys are just mega talented. So what I handed them a pile of crap tracks, home recording crap tracks, basically. And they really polished them into shape. I mean, they worked wonders. So the credit goes to those guys.
Man. Okay. Do you remember what Jason was playing through, like amp-wise and whatnot?
He had a Supro, the mid-size really? Supro.
Okay.
No, actually, the large Supro with the 212s.
Okay, right on.
Okay. And then he's got an assortment of really nice guitars. Nothing super eccentric, but they're all prime versions of those models,
Yeah.
But I don't know beyond that. I mean, he's a great engineer producer in his own right. I'm sure he's got all of his tricks of the trade. I'm just sitting there with my head in the speakers, going, "That I like that. Let's move forward with that," kind of thing.
Yeah, the guitars sound great. It sounds. I mean, everything is just. It sits so beautifully. I mean, you guys have to go check this record out. Here's a link. Actually, let me pull this up. So BV, thank you for moderating the chat per usual. But check out this music. It's so fantastic. You guys hear me talk about Roger and his compadres from Days Gone often. But it's just the music is just so great. And let's talk about synth bass. So Operator's a great place to talk about that synth bass stuff that's going on in there. What did you use on that? Like, is it one of those in your pleasure room, your keyboard pleasure room? Like, what were you using on that?
There's a mid-70s Korg synthesizer called a Maxi Korg. Yeah. It's basically, it's monophonic. It was them trying to compete with the Mini Moog and Odyssey of the day. And they were never as popular, but man, do they have a unique sound. And I noticed very early on when I found one in the 90s that the bass and the bass filter really spoke in a unique way. It's all subtle. It's like, it's hard for me to describe because I'm not an electronics engineer. Bass filter sounds different than the Moog filter, which is the one that you mostly hear on recordings if you hear synth bass, whether that's way back with Gary Wright or stuff in the 80s, a lot of R&B stuff. It's mostly all Mini Moog. But I knew that this Korg would bounce and speak the way I wanted it to. So that's what that is there.
Okay. It's pretty articulate too. I know you're saying it's like
It's
subtle in
super
a way,
articulate.
but
Yeah.
it's
And
very
then
articulate.
Dan Rothschild is playing bass roots in other sections. So the two are going on simultaneously. So it's literally like you have the weight of Dan's bass, and you kind of understand he can't come up here and fill because that's what the bass synth is going to be doing.
Yeah.
Bass synth is going to sit in a more uh, lower, mid, upper bass register, doing little fills and things. And then you got to make sure that the left hand of the keyboard is either out altogether or just playing downbeats. So it's just arranging, because I can create traffic jams really, really quickly. Try to keep it sparse and have everybody function and do what they need to do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's something that, I mean, you've done that for a while, right? Like kind of using synth bass and like, just regular electric bass together to kind of fatten up a track, right? I mean, I think
Yeah.
I remember you talking about that with Warren Hewart when you were on his
Yeah.
channel, maybe. That's where I heard that. But that's
Yeah, those were
brilliant.
fun interviews.
Yeah, he's great. He was on my show too. He's such a great
Oh,
guy, man.
nice.
Yeah,
Nice.
he's a great guy. The last thing I wanted to ask you is on operator, is that a Rhodes? Like, or is that one of your keyboards? Or is that a Whirly? That like stab.
It's a Rose.
Okay, that's what I thought. It has that
But
bell-like thing.
yeah, but on the outro, and maybe in the chorus too, I'd have to go back. I double it with a Hohner pianette,
Oh.
which is similar but different sounding. A Hohner pianette sounds more like a Whirly, actually. So like you would know the Hohner pianette from a lot of Zombies music, Fleetwood Mac. It's a sound you've heard a million times, but often, like in the early days, I always confused it with a Wurlitzer. But when you then actually have these instruments, you can hear their subtle differences and why you want to use one over the other. But what ended up happening was I bring the pianette in, and I'm playing identical parts, and it choruses with the Rhodes really nice, and just creates this kind of 3D thing. It's very organic and has that kind of 70s vinyl punch to it, that I love.
Yeah, man. Well, you do such a great job of soundscaping, and like I know how much of a mad scientist you must have to be on the road with Beck too, like because like your rig is not that big on that tour, is it? Like from what I
Well, it
saw.
used to be. It
Okay.
depends what era you're talking about. I used to have clavinet, a Nord, my Jupiter 8, Prophet 10,
Dang.
upright piano, Baldwin, Discoverer organ, and some Glockenspiel bells. I was surrounded. And then he wanted to like streamline everything. So we started using just a lot more samples. So everything got turned on its head. But that just meant a lot more sound design and sampling. We sampled my Prophet 10s. We could drive it off the computer, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I mean, it's been a very rewarding gig as a keyboard player, especially in the studio. Because in the studio is where we're all deciding what role the keyboards are going to play, what those colors will be like.
Yeah. Well, man, I told you, like, I mean, I've been on board with him since high school, since the early 90s. And I have loved, I mean, my favorite type of musicians, and you can probably relate to this, but my favorite musicians are people that change from record to record and take risks.
Mm.
And like, be damned if my fans come with me. This is what I'm feeling. And I feel that so much with him is he's just like, because Midnight Vultures is one of the greatest masterpieces of a record I've ever heard in my life. And Sea Changes will forever, ever be my rainy day driving record. I love the shit out of that record.
I know, and those are back to back.
Oh, so good, man. So good. And everything, I mean, Guerrero, I mean, I love it all, man. Every kind of different direction that dude has turned feels right. And
Yeah.
I feel that way about like people like Charlie Hunter. Like he just from record to record, he goes in different directions. And I think that's very admirable. And like to be a keyboard player in Beck's band and having to cover all those different eras of music must be so. Did you have like, were there any like oh shit moments where stuff was crapping out, like the software where you're like, somebody fix this?
Thankfully not. We've had good luck with software, and we've had good luck with the vintage synths that I brought out, vintage keyboards. In fact, I'm packing up my clavinet for a show we have this weekend in Orlando, because as good as samples are, there's nothing that does the clavinet thing, and I've used it on a lot of his music. He's an instrument.
Yeah.
No, I've just been so blessed to be invited into his world. I was a fan like most people before we met, and was, I mean, look, I'm one of the most jaded mofos out there, especially at my age, because when you and your partners raise your own standard way the hell up here, then it's like, well, it's going to take a lot to impress us,
Right?
because it's like we already have our own expectations. It's like we're already hard on ourselves. And when I first I loved the Mellow Gold record, and then when the Odelay record came out, which again was a whole new level for him, I was like, my God, what this guy is truly taking all the same ingredients that we all have access to, including needle drops in a hip hop vinyl DJ kind of way, and just scrambling it all up into his own voice, and it was just so refreshing. And the thing was, and I've been proven right since then, all the tools and computers, gadgets, and this, that, and the other he's used, drum machines, whatever, that's all fantastic, but he's a brilliant songwriter.
Yeah.
He can play an acoustic song with a guitar and sing, or at the piano, and play most of his catalog, and it'll floor you because the kernel of the song, the raw tune, stands on its own. All the things we enjoy about his production are the frosting, right? Yeah. So that's what I admired, songwriter to songwriter. I was like, shit, man, if I'm gonna decide now, after having co-fronted these two bands for the last 8 to 10 years of my life, you got to hold your captain of your ship in esteem. You've got to respect him. You can't go, oh, I'm gonna be a sideman. This guy's kind of a hack. Yeah. You're not going to feel good about going to your job every day. Yeah. But as you said a second ago, not only was I a fan of Beck and respected him immensely as an artist, he keeps changing up the game.
Yeah, man.
So it's like, just when I thought I had him figured out, he's going to do that thing that he did on the last record, and he's going to be this kind of song. Nope. Because he's interested in the machine continuing to evolve. Yeah. And sometimes that's been very easy and immediate for me to go to, like, sync up with his philosophy. And other times it's been like, whoa, dude, I kind of don't know where you're coming from. You got to, like, school me a little more. Give me 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And but that's what's been exciting about that part of my career. When sometimes he's had me involved a lot, like on a sea change or whatever, where that's like a traditional band sitting around the singer-songwriter, and he's teaching us the song, and then, all right, let's roll tape. We're all going to improvise our ideas over his song. Or an album like Colors, where he wrote and produced that with another collaborator, Greg Kirsten, but I came in and sang background vocals on a bunch of songs.
Yeah.
Which was really fun to do too. So I wore a different hat for that record.
Man. Are you kind of playing an MD role at all in that band? Like, are you helping to, like, musically direct? Like,
no, Beck's usually the MD. Okay. For all intents and purposes, because he's always producing. He's always producing everything. But the bass player, Mel Johnson, who's been another longtime band member, he's assumed that position in a pseudo way often. Certainly when I joined, because he had been there for several years before I joined. So he would kind of, like, in a Big Brother kind of way, not in the George Orwell sense, but
Yeah, yeah.
in the best sense of the word. You know, kind of nudge and maneuver, and this is the role the keys need to play here, and because Beck was off doing an interview or something. So
Yeah, man, that's so cool. Well, I mean, it's like the breadth of your career is it spans so many different projects, and you've done so much. It's just been so fun. I'm sorry I got to the party a little bit late, Roger, in 2001 or whenever that was. But man, like I'll tell you right now, and I don't mean to blow smoke, but you, as far as I'm concerned, man, you're a musical genius, and like what you do
you're too
with
kind.
with your own music and what you add to other artists that bring you in is just it's palpable to see how much of an influence you have on that stuff. And it's just really fun to watch as a fan, dude. It's just really fun. So,
Well, and you're a musician too, so you pick up on things like I would. You know, like one of my heroes to this day is Thomas Dolby, and
hmm.
I love a lot of the production work he's done with a band called Prefab Sprout. And the other
I
thing I
don't know
love about
that.
him, yeah, yeah, there's several records he did with them that are just jaw dropping. They were actually big inspirations to Andy and I during the Jellyfish days for sure.
Oh,
But
okay.
one of the things I love about him is he's got so much musical skills and chops at his disposal, and he uses them very tastefully. It's
Hmm.
I always try to do, and my collaborators always try to do. It's like don't do something just because you can. It's like always serve the song. Try to use
Hmm.
restraint. Taste. I mean, taste is always a funny one, right? These are all things they don't teach. They can't teach you in music school.
Yeah. Hmm.
Everybody learns the same shit if you come from a scholastic background with music, and then it's like, well, what's going to separate me from the other shredder that's next to me?
Right.
What,
Yeah.
so what are you going to say with it?
Yeah,
And
man.
I always loved what Thomas Dolby did with his kind of skill set because it always ended up being accessible, um, not too sophisticated, where you start alienating people. And look, I mean, I listen to muso music when I want to hear that stuff. I'll go into the jazz collection or the fusion collection and fucking geek out on Mahavishnu Orchestra for days
Yeah.
because it's a drug in and of itself. I still love that stuff.
Yeah,
I have
man.
just not chosen to write and participate in that genre, if you will. This
Hmm.
other genre gave me more fulfillment, satisfaction on a more comprehensive level. But I mean, you can't. What I bring to all this music that you've been very kind to compliment me on, it's infused with lots of fusion, progressive rock, um, a lot of heady, arty, intellectual stuff, a lot of jazz bow shit.
Yeah.
Um, and within those genres, I have my favorites, just like anybody. You know,
Yeah. You can
so
hear it. It comes through. Like you can hear your influence, but you can hear your fingerprint too. That's the thing. It's like, oh, that's a Roger. That's a Roger tune. I know that I immediately, you know what I mean? It's like when I hear Derek Trucks play the first two notes. I'm like, that's Derek Trucks. It's like
right,
immediate. You know what I mean? And I think that's what we all kind of aspire to, right? Like to have a voice so people hear it and like, oh,
absolutely.
I'm attracted to that voice. You know what I mean?
I
Um,
always thought it was so cool that it was very apparent to me in my formative years that a band like the Police or Prince, I knew everything they were grabbing from, but
yeah.
they never sounded like that. I was like, the Police always had an original sound to me. Prince always had an original sound to me that went so far beyond, the kind of R&B history that he was borrowing from and stuff, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you can what comes out of you comes out of you, and it's hard to be 100% self-aware, uh, and sometimes you just have to allow the process. I always have this phrase like, you serve the song. Well, when you're sitting there, you come up with the raw idea, right? Even if it's just a lyric mumble, but a melody shape over a chord rhythm that you're digging, a groove. That's 90% of the song. right? And I would save all my ideas up on a cassette and then listen to them in the car and just go through 40, 50 ideas, and inevitably 4 or 5 of those would like stick out. I was like, oh, there's something there. There's something there. Like, I don't even know what mood I was in that afternoon, but there's a thing. And usually what I mean by that is there's an attitude. There's some kind of mood, like you were talking about, that I'm left with, even in the raw state. Then the task becomes, don't wreck it. So whether that's the lyric, the keyboard idea, the bass part, the bass tone, everything's got to force that mood, attitude, vibe, aesthetic, and not distract from it. It's supposed to reinforce it. So I'm so fascinated to this day with how my heroes have done that. That's what I've tried to do as an arranger or a keyboardist, whether I'm working on my own music or other people's, and serve the song. Somebody may go, hey, we're at the chorus now, and we really want the chorus to explode. We want it to pop. What can the keyboards do? And as a songwriter arranger, I might be saying to myself, I don't think you need any keyboards. What you need is a stronger stereo guitar part, and then like a big, powerful background harmony to, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And so depending on who I'm working with, I might make a suggestion like that. But of course, I'm going to try a keyboard thing first, because that's what they've brought me in and hired me to do.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we can come up with something. But again, I'm thinking about it as a songwriter arranger. And keyboards might, especially if it's a heavy guitar written song, keyboards might might wimp it out too much. Might take some of the testosterone out of it.
Huh. Yeah.
Right? I mean, I've always been conscious of the role keyboards can play, because they're a different tonality, and sometimes they can. I don't want to hear keyboards in a Nirvana song.
Right, and I don't want to hear guitar in a Ben Folds 5 song.
There you go.
I don't want to. Like it feels like it just takes away from the vibe of the tune itself.
Those are 2 really good examples of what I'm talking about, and you have to be aware of this stuff to serve the song, and let it be what it wants to be. That's why there are songs on my solo records that have no keyboards, because they were probably written on guitar, and they have this edgy teenage energy to them. And if there's keyboards on them, they're tucked way in the back, and they're just kind of there for reinforcement. You can't really tell, because I want that teenage, sweaty garage energy that can only come from a guitar trio,
Yeah, totally, man. Oh man, that's so great. Well, I want to hold you up here. Let's do the lightning round get down, because I want you to get back to your life. I really appreciate you taking the time and doing this, though, man. And I've been doing this season so far, Roger. So I've been telling a dad joke right before the. I thought this one was pretty good. I told my wife last night, and she's like, "Okay, that was pretty good." All right. How do you find Will Smith in a snowstorm?
I have no clue.
You look for Fresh Prince. It's pretty good.
And did you make this up?
No, dude. I've scoured the internet with my daughter. Like one day, like we got to find a bunch of dad jokes for this season that we like, and I found
that's a fun father-daughter activity.
Oh, dude, when we're on road trips and stuff, she just sits in the back, and we'll do like, my wife is huge into like puzzles and stuff. So my daughter will find like, puzzles and like jokes, and it's just like, that's what we do when we drive around.
Right.
Yeah, buddy. All right. So I'm going to put this metronome on at 112 BPM cruising altitude, just for a little bit of suspense. The first question is always the same. Blue hated on me when I did this to him, and I'm sure you might too, but this is always the same one.
Can I say no comment? Or you need an answer?
Give me an answer, because I'm curious about what you think. But
okay.
I think I know what this will be, but like, it's such a division in the music community. But
yeah, I don't want to. I'm gonna alienate myself. I'm gonna get canceled for telling my true opinion.
Oh no, it's not that bad. Lennon or McCartney?
McCartney.
Star Wars or Star Trek?
Star Trek.
Stax or Motown?
Wow. Motown.
Turtleneck or Dickie?
Turtleneck.
Whirly or Rhodes?
Whirly.
Okay. If you had a superpower between these two, teleportation or time travel?
Teleportation or time travel? Oh, time travel.
Okay. Record to tape or record to DAW?
Tape.
Sea changes or morning phase?
Wow. Sea change.
Movie or TV series? Like, would you rather sit and watch a whole movie, or are you into like binging a TV series?
Oh, movie.
Okay.
I'm OG that way.
Okay. And here's the last one. Sometimes this is the hardest, sometimes this is the easiest. If you could take one album, doesn't have to be your favorite album of all time, mind you, but if you could take one album and erase it from your memory, kind of like Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, just so you could go back and experience it for the first time again, what album would that be?
Wow, that's such a good question. I mean, I just love the construct of that.
Yeah.
Hear it for the first time. Damn. There's so many. I mean, a good one is not opera.
Say that again. It broke up a little bit, Roger.
Queen's Night at the Opera.
Oh, okay. All right. Tell me why. Tell me why particularly that one.
Because the spectacle that is obviously not only Bohemian Rhapsody, but several other songs on there like Death on Two Legs. And, is just such a jarring shock to what the plateau or the playing field of rock and roll was at the time.
Nice.
I mean, there's a lot of records I could say to answer that question though.
Dude, I mean, I've had so many people on this show. I think it's over 140 episodes now, and they've all been interesting. Like everybody's like answers. Like I had I say this all the time, but Gabe Dixon, who's the keyboard player for Tedeschi Trucks Band, was on.
Oh yeah.
He's a huge Elton fan, and I thought he was going to say Tumbleweed Connection or something like
right,
that.
or something like that. Yeah.
And he dropped Dark Side of the Moon, and I was like, "Oh, okay, sure." I mean, yeah, of course. But
I mean,
somebody asked me one time, and guess what I said? Spilt milk.
Wow.
So,
I'm
dude,
flattered.
I'm telling you, man. Like the first time I heard Hush, when Jamie put that friggin' CD on, I was like, "What the hell is this?" And then when Fan Club kicked in, I was like, "Holy shit!"
Cool.
Play it again. Play it again. It's the same way I've had like experience with a couple records in my life, but man, I love the idea of that question too, because it's like, what would you want to experience again? There's so many, so much music.
And so much of the joy. I mean, right. So I mean, life. So many cherished moments are first time moments.
Yeah.
And you know, even the Kiss Alive 1 record, which I was the prime age to be inspired by as a little boy, that ripped my head off because I didn't know what to make of it when I first heard it. Now, I still like parts of that record, but compared to all the music that I've consumed since, you know,
Yeah.
But the energy and the tone and mood and the I'm doing something evil that my parents wouldn't like just simply by listening to this music. There's something I potentially should feel guilty about here, and just all those kind of feelings and sensations. But you know, there's a lot of, I mean, not a lot, but there's some prog rock records that would definitely fit into that category because they, especially if you grow up and you hear things like the Beatles and Creedence and I don't know, Zeppelin and AC/DC and just like standard 60s, 70s rock fare. And then somebody slips you like a Yes song or a Genesis song from the same time period.
Yeah.
it's like, wait, what? These people have the same instruments as this other band has?
Right?
Why does it sound so completely different? Why does it sound like it's from another planet?
Yeah.
And
What is your favorite Yes song? Not to interrupt you, but like, or your favorite Yes record? You think?
it's a toss up between Relayer and Close to the Edge.
Okay. Okay.
There's a lot of Yes records I like, but those are they still captivate me, and they still do. The most highly addictive part of music for me was that music was my first drugs. I mean, I suppose next to some candy bar my parents forbid me from eating or something, but anytime I would come back to certain recordings, a switch would get flipped, and I would be in an altered state.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't even have the words to articulate it. I just knew I wanted that fix over and over again. And Yes was really good at that.
Oh my God, yeah.
Just super fascinated by how they did that. And same with Genesis. Genesis did it 100% also in a completely different way. They had their own tools and strategies for doing that same thing. And those bands were concurrent. And I always remind everybody that when we think of, like, you know, the apex of Yes and around the Yes Songs album or Relay or something, or Genesis, Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, nobody in those bands was over the age of 26.
That's crazy, dude. That is so crazy.
Because you think you hear that music now and it sounds like 40-year-olds are making it.
The most brilliant kind of like forethought, like composed through music.
Yeah, exactly right.
Dude.
I mean, you can even say that about Steely Dan. I mean, those guys weren't over 30 during their heyday.
That's nuts, man.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny too to tie a Soundgarden song into this, but you know, Starship Troopers, the end of that song.
Yeah.
You listen to Pretty Noose, the Soundgarden tune. Listen to those two parts. If you listen to Starship Troopers, yeah, there's the end when it's just the guitar and that like that flanged out guitar. Every time it's on, I'm always singing "Hanging From," like, you know, that thing at the end. And it's every time I hear, and I can't get it out of my head. It's the same thing with like the theme in Lord of the Rings. That's the da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. I'm like, that's freaking Bruce Hornsby. What the hell, man? There's, you know, do you do that stuff too? Like where you hear shit?
Oh,
like,
I do it too much, because then what happens is I accuse people of stealing from each other. because I, you know, before Andy and I would record a single note, we like made sure all of our musical friends and people, like, if we've stolen anything, you guys got to tell us. If like we unconsciously like grabbed a phrase from somebody, you got to tell us, you know.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Fortunately, that didn't happen, but I mean, I've caught myself before, and I go, nope, can't use that idea. Gonna have to put that one over here, because, you know, it's like, oh, that's too close to this thing. Thankfully, it hasn't happened too often, but anyway,
man,
there's a lot of those out there.
Well, Roger, I really appreciate your time, man. Great record. Thank you so much for continuing to pump some awesome music out into the world. We need it.
You're welcome. Thank you for appreciating it.
Yeah, man. And then BV, thanks again. Everybody, go to Roger's website. There's tons of stuff you can check out. Instagram is here. Here's a link to some records, Radio Daze and Glamping. Check out, I'd go backwards. Just check out all the shit. It's so good. It's so good.
I have a lot of fan engagement stuff at my website too.
Yep, and all the stuff
music lessons and
and all the stuff you've been doing on Instagram with talking about the songs from the record. That's been awesome too.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so that's really enjoyable. Like getting the back of the story, the back end of the story is, I mean, for nerds like us, it's just the best. So, but Roger, hang tight. Everybody else, thank you for coming out. Take care of yourself. Take care of each other. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye.